Right, first time try. I love it when it works that way. So as you heard, my name is Melanie Schlatterbeck. Based on the names that I saw, I think Vic is probably the only one that has seen portions of this or knows a lot of the details. So hopefully it won't be too repetitive for you. But I work as the Green Vision Coordinator for Friends of Harbors, Beaches, and Parks, or FHBP as we like to abbreviate our name. And I was going to chat about the successes we've had in Orange County and how all of that has come together because of our Green Vision Coalition. So there are 3 topics that I was going to cover tonight: the Green Vision Project, which is a group of conservation and community-based organizations, and then the Orange County Transportation Authority, or OCTA, their transportation sales tax, which is renewed Measure M, and their environmental mitigation program, and last but not least, the recent research projects that we've been doing the last couple months related to mapping. So first up is the Green Vision Project, which was specifically developed by Friends of Harbors, Beaches, and Parks. And before I jump into the project, for kind of baseline purposes, what FHBP's mission is to protect the natural lands, waterways, and beaches in Orange County. We've got a whole slew of things listed in our mission, but that's exactly what it synthesizes down to. And the organization formed in 1997 through the leadership of Gene Watt and others, so that name may ring a bell for those of you familiar with Newport Beach. And what the Green Vision Project aims to do is increase funding for parks, water quality, and open spaces here in Orange County. And we've pulled together a coalition of more than 80 conservation and community groups. You'll see Amigos listed on this slide. Each of these organizations has their own mission, and they ultimately support the Green Vision Project because it brings a benefit to them through the unified voice. Some other ones here. So everything from water quality to connecting people of faith to the environment, to cultural resources, and all of these groups align to support the Green Vision Project. And what FHBP has done is host workshops and conferences to educate those coalition members about issues and strategies and new information and tools that would help in their conservation efforts, whatever those might be. But one of the coolest things is the Green Vision Map. And for those of you who don't know about GIS, which Graphic Information Systems, it's a mapping program that allows you to overlay different types of data from points, lines, and polygons. And this is our map that the coalition has pulled together over the last 20 years. It started out as a hand-drawn map, got converted to a digital map back when that kind of took off in the early 2000s, and now I'm, with my geography degree, the one tasked with keeping this map current. And we update it annually. So somebody, for example, will send me a project APN or information related to their site so that we know what needs to be changed. Ultimately, this map is the vision of what needs to be preserved in Orange County, and it's the basis for all of our work. All right, so I'll pause for a second, and I'll do this at each segment, and you let me know if you have any questions kind of right off the bat, and then we'll also take a greater time at the end. All right, gave a chance for people to get off mute, so if I'm jumping on your toes, let me know. All right, so the OCTA Renewed Measure M Environmental Mitigation Program is an activity that FHBP has been involved with since 2005. So I'm going to point to San Diego because it's important to learn the lessons of other organizations and other counties so that you can do great things in your county. So they have a half-cent sales tax measure focused on transportation called Transnet, and it includes this thing called advanced mitigation. And because they had freeway projects that expanded into, I don't want to say pristine per se, but nice habitat areas in San Diego, whether it was backcountry or along coastal bays, estuaries, and wetlands, they were able to pull together $850 million to get conservation projects done in the county. And it was supported by conservation groups. So in terms of background, San Diego, just like Orange County, is what you call a self-help county. And these self-help counties pass measures in order to fund transportation or infrastructure projects. And about 40% of the 58 counties in our state are self-help counties. So Orange County has had 2 transportation sales tax measures. The first one, M1, was approved in 1989 and spanned basically 20 years. At the time, it only required basically 50% plus 1 of the vote, and they got almost 55% of the vote. And they spent $3.1 billion meeting the program descriptions of what they said they were going to do in the measure. So you can see on the right-hand side in the chart exactly what they said they were going to spend their money on. Now, focusing on that chart, let's move to Measure M2. Hey, look, it's exactly the same. So in those 20 years, they're continuing to stick with most of the funding going to freeways, then to local streets and roads, and then to transit. And as a side note, if you look at LA County, it's pretty much the opposite. Everything goes to transit. Very little goes to streets and roads and to freeways. So OCTA, in its wisdom, actually decided to start extra early getting this second measure passed, M2, because the first time round with M1, it took 3 times before voters in order to get the measure approved. And now the threshold was 2/3 of the vote. So you can see they had a decent margin at 69.7% when they needed 66%. But you'll also see that the amount of money that they've spent, $11.8 billion, that's a lot more, 2.5 times essentially more than they had proposed spending with the first one. So in terms of what we tried to do, we tried to understand, and again, we speak conservation, we don't speak transportation, and so we had to learn the language, as did OCTA in reverse. They needed to learn how to speak conservation and understand the importance and significance of the words they were using. So in normal conditions, each freeway project budget, you'll see them labeled there A through N, they all had their own mitigation, environmental, permit budget in their individual numbers. So looking at A, with $470 million set aside for that specific project, we did the math, again, having done the research with San Diego, and actually now we added in Riverside County, 5 to 8% of those budgets go to environmental mitigation. So 5 to 8% of the I-5 freeway improvements ranged between $23.5 million and basically $38 million. And that's all well and good, but the reality is we wanted something spent a little bit better here in Orange County, because this approach was piecemealed. It was project by project. Every time a freeway project needed to have an EIR, it was done individually, and each permit was issued individually. And we thought that was pretty inefficient. We also knew what our boundaries were. And this is the nice way of saying if they included these projects, we were going to walk away from our discussions. And those 3 projects were the toll road extension, the 241 through San Onofre. Even though it was in San Diego County, you just never know when they're going to try to slip something sneaky in. And at the moment, we did not really trust them, so we had to dot all of our I's and cross all of our T's. The second one was the tunnel through the forest, which basically would have landed in Irvine and stretched all the way over to Temecula. And that was going to have a lot of impacts, not only because of a tunnel, but there was going to have to be a surface road above it to maintain the tunnel. So it was basically 2 roads. And then the third one was the extension of the 57 freeway over the Santa Ana River, which just seemed like a terrible idea to get people down to Pacific Coast Highway. So there are very few portions of the river that are not channelized, and this would have channelized basically the rest of it. So we knew where our boundaries were, and we walked in with those cards held to our chest, just waiting. Thankfully, OCTA was smart about its polling, and they asked the community in those polls if certain projects were included, would they still support the measure? And the answer was no. And that was really beneficial for us. So we were able to align our interests in terms of what the controversial projects were, and they left them out of the measure. And that reassured us that we weren't going to have to fight something after supporting something. So the idea ultimately was to send in a team of negotiators. There were 4 of us, and we armed ourselves with information related to sales tax measures, related to mitigation, the environment, and the freeways. And we needed to show them the benefits of doing something comprehensively. And so we had to keep it simple. We did have some, I'll say, lofty ideas, like a monorail system to connect Orange County communities, or like a hover system, and we just thought they're going to laugh us out of the room. It's a terrible idea. We need to focus on something that's actually obtainable. So back to this list of what they included in their freeway project list, we said, let's look at the big number. Instead of looking at each individual freeway project number, let's look at the master budget, and let's do 5 to 8% of that. Now, our freeway projects, and this program is solely tied to the freeway project list, as opposed to streets and roads. We don't go through any new open spaces. We don't have any new roads being proposed in this measure. So we were watching all of these things. We basically said, you know, we know your budget's going to be 5 to 8%. Where are you going to land? And they landed at 5%, which was $243.5 million. Now, in terms of context for that number is more at the time than Orange County had received per capita for every park bond that had been approved and expenditures sent out locally. So this was a great number in our eyes to meet our conservation goals. So this programmatic approach, basically, instead of doing piecemeal project by project mitigation, it was required to look at the big picture. They were required to bundle not only the impacts caused by the freeway projects, but bundle the funding for it. And this requirement is what really helped us advance not only our idea, but our conservation goal. We weren't asking for new money. We were asking for money to be spent more wisely that was already included in the budget. So that was a huge selling point for OCTA. So some key points of the ordinance, and the ordinance is actually the legal language that gets approved by the voters. And so the ordinance was the piece of information that we actually hired the attorneys to help us with, because we didn't want to miss anything. So we have 5% of the net revenues from the freeway program going specifically to this environmental mitigation program. And there are 3 ways the money can be spent. It can be spent on acquisition of land, restoration of land, and management. And so far, we've spent it on all of that, but it's always going to be bundled. When you have an acquisition, you're always going to have a management component. And when you have restoration, you're always going to have a management component. We've looked at just doing management, but it's never actually come to fruition. Another key item that Dan Silver from Endangered Habitats League wanted to make sure was included was that any wildlife corridor that had been in existence prior to this measure being approved, if it had any impacts because of the freeway expansions, those impacts needed to be mitigated from a budget outside of this component, because funding had likely already been spent keeping that wildlife corridor intact. And that seemed like a huge drain on our funding, and we didn't want to see it go to places that they should be protecting anyways. So the next idea, which was also Dan Silver's, was a net environmental benefit. And ultimately what that means is we wanted to see the environment come out better after the freeway projects were built instead of neutral. There had to be a benefit. And that language has actually been incredibly helpful as Caltrans has developed its advanced mitigation program. And last but not least, there was an oversight committee that was created. And this was important because we needed to know not only how the money was being spent, but we needed to watch it be spent. We couldn't just assume that the leaders at OCTA were going to spend it the way it should be spent. They'd never done this before, although neither had we, but we had more experience related to conservation. So knowing all that we knew at this point, going back to that Green Vision Coalition, we reached out to, at that point it was in the 60s instead of the 80s in terms of quantity of members, and we said, who wants to support this measure? And as you'll see, Amigos is on the list here. So there was some wisdom around possible benefits for the Bolsa Chica area. And we ended up having about 33 conservation and community groups ultimately support this component of the measure. And we've always been very careful to say we support the environmental mitigation program as opposed to we support Measure M, because that just seemed really scary to us to actually support a transportation measure. And it was the first time in Orange County's history that any transportation measure had this level of engagement and involvement from the environmental community. In fact, former Supervisor Bill Campbell, who was in charge of the 3rd District, basically stepped forward after the measure passed and said it's only because of the Environmental Coalition that this measure got past that 2/3 of a vote. So that was fantastic. What we ended up doing with this mailer was pretty much everyone on the list provided their contacts in Orange County, because remember it's an Orange County based program. The mailing house went through, removed all the duplicate names and duplicate households, and we sent out this mailer paid for by the group trying to get Measure M passed, which I think at the time the Orange County Business Council was in charge of that. And so all of our participants or supporters and donors got this pamphlet saying this transportation measure has some benefit to the environment, and we're supporting it. We hope you do too. So that was also a first. We'd never done any type of mailing like that. So in terms of the Environmental Oversight Committee, now remember this is defined in the ordinance. It's an official committee established by OCTA, and there are 12 representatives. We have 2 representatives from the Environmental Coalition, myself and Dan Silver, who I referenced earlier. We have resource agency attendees, including U.S. Fish and Wildlife, Department of Fish and Wildlife, so the state and federal side, as well as the Army Corps of Engineers, the regional board. We also have 2 board members that participate, Caltrans, we have a couple members of the Taxpayer Oversight Committee, and the public. And right now the chair is Supervisor Lisa Bartlett, who's in the 5th District, so South Orange County. And then I have been the vice chair since the committee was established in November of 2008. So I have been the consistent thread who knows the program's ins and outs and makes sure that OCTA stays on target. So how do you actually evaluate how to spend $243 million when you've got 18 highly influential and very political members of a transportation committee? Science. That's how. We needed to apply science to this so that pet projects weren't funded over things that actually benefited OCTA getting streamlined permits, getting approvals in place, getting things done faster because this program existed. So I, along with a couple others from the resource agencies, decided to apply the principles of conservation biology. And I'm going to walk through some of those and how they apply to mostly the acquisition side of the program, but we did modify it to include the restoration component as well. So there were two sides to this. One was the biology and the other one was non-biology. So we separated it and evaluated based on biology, and then things kind of got kicked up on the list if they had community support, if there were matching funds, if there was a threat of development that would be eased in some way, shape, or form. So we tried to balance getting the environmental community's input into this without ruining the science. So what science tells us then is bigger landscapes are better. They have a lot more benefit than smaller landscapes. Science also tells us that contiguous landscapes are better. Connected landscapes are better than islands of habitat. Science tells us that closer is better if lands are separated. OCTA always hated it when I brought this slide up, that roadless landscapes are better. Roads cause habitat fragmentation and more edges, so they're not great. Science tells us that fewer edges are better so that you have more core habitat. More species diversity is better than less species diversity. Bigger habitats actually have more species. Species should be well distributed across the landscape. And I'll pause here on this slide for just a moment, especially because you brought up the fire, and I'm going to chat about fires here in a little bit, but ultimately, if all of the species are in the bottom right corner of your habitat, and there's a fire down there, and let's say they can't move quickly and they get too stressed to fly or something, you could lose the entire population in one natural disaster. So having these species distributed across the landscape is really helpful. Well, what reality tells us is that we don't plan our communities based on conservation biology. So our landscape tells a very different story than what we should be doing in terms of protecting species. So our Green Vision map ultimately led to the creation of a conservation assessment. And this was done through a nonprofit called the Conservation Biology Institute, and they're based down in San Diego. And we provided them with basically the protected lands layer for Orange County and its environs. And that was a really cool use of our map to help determine areas that should be protected. And they ended up with 11 what are called core areas and 4 linkages. So for example, one linkage is by the Great Park. Let me pop on my laser pointer here. There's a linkage here. There's a linkage at Cold Canyon, etc. Oops, and maybe I need to get out. So the conservation assessment, actually using GIS, did a positional prioritization of all of the natural lands that were unprotected. And the easiest way to think about it is if you have a donut, and that donut represents protected landscapes, the donut hole is really important to protect. So the donut holes end up having a really high positional priority. So if it's high, you're going to see it in this magenta color. If it's kind of so-so on the medium level, it's yellow, and then the blue level is the low level. And as acquisitions occur, these positional prioritizations adjust so that you're constantly evolving your strategy. So in terms of the conservation tool that OCTA considered. There were several of them. So they could do fee title acquisition, and that was it. They could do deed restrictions on the land that get recorded as it's preserved. They could do conservation easements, or they could do what is called the Natural Communities Conservation Plan and Habitat Conservation Plan, which are both voluntary programs established by the state and federal governments respectively to comprehensively mitigate for some big impact. And what they opted to do was the NCCP-HCP. So for short, we just call it the Conservation Plan. It identifies all 13 freeway projects as what are called covered activities, and all of Orange County is included in the Conservation Plan. So any property in Orange County potentially could be eligible for acquisition, restoration, or management expenditures. The reason they picked the Conservation Plan approach was because of no surprises clause. And what that means is they were basically guaranteed that as of the time the plan was developed, whatever species were on the California Endangered Species Act list or the Federal Endangered Species Act list, those were the species they were trying to protect. And so if something new got included on either the state or federal endangered species list, they wouldn't have to be backtracking and mitigating that new species in the future. It was basically a timestamp. From this moment forward, they're required to do these particular species. So we had 13 freeway project impacts and 13 species that were protected or were focused for protection. So in terms of what we've done so far, we did end up getting an early tranche of funding right at the perfect time in 2007, just before the crash of the economy and the big recession that happened, which ended up helping us because everyone was willing to sell and the prices were significantly better. So we have protected 7 properties so far. 1,300 acres of land have been set aside through this conservation plan, and we've basically spent $30 million. I will say one of the areas of contention on the environmental side, there were some organizations that said, in order to get my support for this measure, so this is back in 2005, you need to make sure you list my property as something we're going to acquire. And we could not afford them that guarantee. And it makes sense when I explain it, and it's because, let's say your property has redwoods on it. And I know that's not an Orange County species, but I'm going big here, so follow along. So if your property has redwoods on it, and they're only impacting coastal sage scrub or coastal salt marsh, they're not going to get mitigation credit for buying redwoods. And so that is not a wise investment of the public's taxpayer dollars. So we had to explain to one particular group that wasn't going to fly, and we couldn't guarantee that to anyone. But what we could guarantee is that every time a property was purchased, all the other properties then went up a notch because something got checked off the list. And that made them potentially eligible for other funding sources. And when you think about it, lands in the Puente Chino Hills are not eligible for coastal funding. And so there are segments of funding sources or grant programs that don't always apply to each geography. Now, in terms of the locations, we have 4 properties in the Trabuco Canyon area, 1 property up in Brea, 1 in Silverado Canyon, and 1 along the coast in Laguna Beach. And you'll see all of the names here typically relate to the location or the owner. And I advocated very early on that we should not name it the McPherson Preserve because this gentleman, this family sold the land. We should name it something different, and maybe we involve the public. And that's what OCTA did. So they came up with entirely new names, geography-based and resource-based and even species-based, and allowed the public to vote on it, and then had this big unveiling. So that was kind of fun. But for kind of historical context, I wanted to show you the ways that we released the images of the lands that were preserved, so that they all look the same, with their protected banner and their name up in yellow on the left corner. In terms of restoration projects, we have involved 12 different sites, one of which near Bolsa, Chica, is the Harriet Weider Regional Park. And one of the coolest ones, I will say, is the one we approved in 2017, which was the removal of dams that had been constructed in Trabuco Creek up in the Cleveland National Forest, so that it improved fish mobility up in these creeks for spawning. So that's kind of fun. So we have 350 acres that have been included in our restoration efforts. We've spent basically $10 million on the restoration side, and 3 of the projects as of last week had actually received all the, they've checked off all the boxes necessary to receive approval from the wildlife agencies for meeting the requirements for those particular projects. So in terms of the role of the conservation groups, we ultimately wanted a seat at the table. And in order to do that, we needed to have what I'll call non-traditional partnerships. We needed to align our interests with somebody we'd never consider a partner until now. We also had to do our homework. We had to do a lot of homework, and we had to testify, we had to write letters, we had to educate decision makers, we had to educate OCTA staff, we had to leverage conservation dollars. So sometimes there were opportunities to have funding come from another source that bolstered an acquisition or a restoration project. And back to that non-biological criteria, that's something that would promote a project up from a lower rank because it had additional outside funding. In terms of how the coalition has participated, FHBP has taken the lead on writing comment letters, on engaging with OCTA, writing speeches, as well as reviewing all of the documents that come out of OCTA. And that includes the entire list that you're seeing before you here. So in many instances, I have read these documents at least once, sometimes maybe twice. I can tell you the conservation plan itself was probably 1,200 pages. So these are not small documents, but thankfully I'm really detail oriented. Right now, they're working on the release of wildfire management plans as well as invasive species plans. And the conservation plan became official in June of 2017, the day before the resource agencies had provided the permits. And we were able to officially celebrate the success of and relationships gained during this conservation plan establishment. So all the OCTA staff are the ones in green. We've got some of the resource agency partners there, as well as part of the environmental coalition. And in terms of kind of what's next, we are establishing a non-wasting endowment. So back to that mitigation management component, the reality is you need money to manage it. So when you purchase a house, for example, you might need to replace the roof at some time, or maybe you need an upgrade in the bathroom, or all of a sudden the carpet got ripped up by your dog and you need to replace that. Property is the same way. We can have natural disasters occur on them. We could have beetles infest the trees and actions need to be taken to preserve a woodland on the site. You could have encroachments. And so this endowment is being established right now. And what we're hoping in the next 6 to 12 months is that OCTA establishes who its long-term managers are going to be. So OCTA is not in the business of owning and managing open space. They They do streets, roads, freeways, and transit. So they need to rely on partnerships, whether it's with state parks, a land trust, or another nonprofit, or county regional parks, to own and manage these preserves on their behalf. And we need to continue the expenditures, right? Because we only spent about $100 million, and we have $150 million left. Thankfully, with inflation, we actually have quite a bit of money still available to us. But because we're accruing it incrementally at this point and paying off the debt service from pulling it early and paying off our restoration projects and continuing to manage the land, those future expenditures are not actually going to happen until 2028. That's the first time we'll have more money available. And we're also working on the restoration projects and trying to get those projects to meet their success criteria so that they can be signed off. All right, I will pause again, and if you have another any question for me here, please unmute yourself and speak up.
The Bolsa Chica Conservancy used Measure M funds for the Harriet Weeder project you mentioned. Mm-hmm. Was that a one-time acquisition fund, or is that an ongoing project that goes restoration over the years?
It's a restoration project that goes over multiple years, and depending on the requirements generally established by the Army Corps of Engineers, the success criteria need to be reached by year 5 or year 10.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Melanie, this is Vic.
Sure.
Just a bit of deep history going back to the Measure M2. The Amigos de Bolsa Chica was very nearly one of the organizations that refrained from support from your efforts because some of our leadership was so skeptical of the goodwill and really the integrity of the development community and the highway and the OCTA that we came close to backing away from support. I'm glad to see that we did in fact support your efforts, and that they have been so successful as they have been over the years.
I agree. We appreciate your support. That's for sure. Any other questions or comments? All right, not hearing anyone step forward then. I'm just going to recap the last kind of 7 or 8 months of my life in terms of what FHBP has been involved with. As you heard, my major was geography. I was the last class of hand-drawn maps and the first class of digital maps. So I date myself by saying that if you know the technology. But all of these projects are basically mapping based, which was really fun for me. So the first project I'm going to chat about is the CEQA mitigation study. The California Environmental Quality Act, or CEQA, is a premier environmental law that was passed in 1970, and it requires basically a disclosure to not only the public, but also decision makers about the impacts a project's going to have on the environment. And typically mitigation requirements are established by those same resource and permitting agencies that I've talked about with Measure M Environmental Oversight Committee. So U.S. Fish and Wildlife, California Department of Fish and Wildlife, Army Corps of Engineers, the Regional Water Quality Control Board. And certain criteria are needed to be established and met in order for the project to be signed off. So what we did was we circulated a very simple questionnaire to our Green Vision Coalition and solicited projects to look at. Now those projects, because we were reviewing the success or failure of mitigation sites, had to already have been built and the mitigation basically complete. So we had 38 projects submitted, and when we reviewed those 38, we ended up with 12 that actually met the criteria of being built and mitigation pretty close to completion or already done. If you're not familiar, there is a law that California has passed, the Public Records Act request. The federal side has the Freedom of Information Act. We use those two government in sunshine laws to submit document requests to 54 different agencies, trying to understand the components of each of these sites, which included 3 types of development. We had mixed use, we had residential, and infrastructure projects. And what we found was, across the board, on a scale of 1 to 5, 1 being low, 5 being high, most projects averaged 3.2, which is not as great as you would hope, considering mitigation, considering the development rather, is a permanent impact. And if the mitigation is just kind of so-so, that means the environment is still lacking. There was no serious net environmental benefit, and somebody probably didn't do their job right or whatever. So this is important for the agencies to know. And we ended up with about 15 recommendations, whether it was funding for our resource agencies, improvements in the environmental laws, or improvements in the database that manages mitigation and species data. So this information is available on our website. We did analyze in your geography, since I keep trying to bring it back home to Bolsa Chica, the Brightwater development. So you can look up the appendix on Brightwater and research and see how that particular site did. It was one of our better ones. I also did a wildfire study. We had initially data from about 100 years, and I added the last 5, because what we've seen is that more fires seem to be occurring. We wanted to understand whether or not those impacts and those fire starts were continuing to happen more frequently or not, and the answer is yes. So we reviewed 2 locations, which were the Santa Ana Mountains and Laguna Coast, and you can see in the little table there that the Santa Ana Mountains had a total number of 218 fires across those 105 years, and the Laguna Coast had 47. And to put this in context, our habitat types, just kind of generally speaking, coastal sage scrub and chaparral, should burn every 30 to 150 years. So for the Santa Ana Mountains, portions of that mountain range are burning every 6 months, which is too frequently for the plants to actually recover. And the Laguna Coast is burning every 3 years or so, and that's also too frequent. So this was really important information, and because I'm a geographer, you get to see lots of maps. I'm so excited. So this map shows the ignitions that happen in the Santa Ana Mountains. If the flame is orange, that means that it came from the original study we did. And if it's blue, it's the new study. So what you can see then is, getting my laser pointer here, the freeway, or the toll road rather, and those urban edges seem to be where the fires are starting. We also looked at, kind of using one of the features of GIS, the darker areas. This is kind of like population density. The darker the area, the more something happens. And in this instance, it's more fires. And again, those dark areas tend to follow the roadways. So the lighter the color, the fewer fires have happened. In terms of Laguna Coast, here's an example of us looking at the perimeters that we have of where fires burned. If it's red, that came from the original study. And if it's blue, it came from the new version of the study. So we wanted to see how they were overlapping. And this allows us to come up with that hotspot map. We also looked at ignitions, and you can tell by the type of icon what caused the fire. And when I heard you talking about the Bolsa Chica fire, and it might have been a cigarette flicked out or something, entirely possible. But what our research has found is that fire agencies rarely actually get to the cause of an ignition for a wildland fire. We don't know why. It may not be high on the priority list. There may be staffing issues. They may not have enough information, as opposed to a house fire where they're going to point to, it was the toaster oven, it had a short circuit, and that's what burned the house down. And they have to do that research because of insurance needs and the risks associated with life and property, as opposed to our natural lands, which are viewed very differently. We also looked at, in terms of tallies, how many types of fires and how much acreage actually burned in those different categories. So this is both the Santa Ana Mountains and the Laguna Coast. We also broke it down by season. So we know that July has the most fire starts. That makes sense with the holiday, 4th of July. And we also looked at the acreages associated with those seasonal burns. And so July may have had a lot of fire starts, but they actually had very small acreages, whereas say October and November, when the Santa Ana winds were blowing, those had absolutely catastrophic fires, a lot of houses damaged, and a lot of acreage burned. So next up, and there's a photo right there of Bolsa Chica, taken by Paul Arms, if that name rings a bell. And we looked at water quality and their impacts to parks. So we basically got a grant to review different types of impacts to parks, and this one focused on water quality. The Clean Water Act has a section called the 303D, which basically evaluates the pollution levels of water bodies. And we had 70 303D listed water bodies in Orange County, or that drained into Orange County. And there were 39 different pollutants that created those 303D lists. And so you can see in terms of the lands that were impacted, we had 2 federal lands, 8 state lands, and 17 county lands. And of course, here's the map that goes with it, with each of the parks or habitat areas delineated in addition to the 303D listed waters. Next up is sea level rise, which I'm sure you all are paying close attention to. We reviewed 4 different scenarios, ended up getting data from the CalAdapt website and applied that to Orange County. So the 4 different increments were 0, which is the current level, 3 feet, 6 feet, and 9 feet of sea level rise. And in the worst case scenario, federal lands had 1, state lands had 11, and county lands had 16 park areas impacted. And again, worst case scenario, you can see with the darker color here, that's the sea level rise. So the bay is impacted over by Banning Ranch and the wetlands, Bolsa Chica, Seal Beach, Long Beach, the Los Cerritos wetlands. So this was important for everyone to understand where we need to either put green infrastructure or do a better job defending our coastline. And we didn't even try to analyze the impacts. We just wanted to see where the impacts were. And we also know, in addition to parklands, clearly houses, roads, city buildings, etc., are going to be impacted as well. And last but not least, published at the end of June, was a tree infestation study. We reviewed 2 beetle infestations, the invasive shot-hole borer, which is a really nasty bug. It has no preference for a tree. It'll attack anything, a fruit tree, a eucalyptus tree, sycamore trees, you name it. And then the GSOB, which is the gold-spotted oak borer. And just like its name suggests, it focuses on our oak trees. And so you can see we actually only had data available for county level parks as opposed to state and federal like we did last time. The invasive shot-hole borer has more instances than the GSOB, but the GSOB is a little bit more confined. So the infestation for the shot-hole borer, if it's in red, the little dot, that means it's a high level of infestation versus the yellow, which is just medium. So those tend to be trees that they're watching. And then in terms of the gold-spotted oak borer, there were quite a few up in the Irvine Ranch lands, and then you'll see 1 dot down in the Trabuco area on the OCTA property. And so we know it's spread, but it doesn't appear to have spread as far as the invasive shot-hole borer. So the big thing, and it's ironic that this fits with the pandemic, but we need to look for super spreaders, those trees that are actually going to be causing problems with the nearby trees, and get rid of those. And it's a very lengthy process in terms of chipping the wood to a certain size, making sure it's solarized so that all of the pests are eliminated, that they can't get out from underneath the plastic tarp, and in some instances, like with the GSOB, need to stay there for up to 5 to 7 years. So this problem seems to be spread really easily through unknowing visitors that are bringing campfire from their area into a new park. And so the issue is buy it where you burn it. That's the new phrase. And if you're going to go camping somewhere out in Riverside, buy your wood out in Riverside, because you could be bringing a pest into that area that could decimate the tree population. So with that, I am done. I hope I didn't take too much time, but again, happy to answer questions, and I will leave the slide up if anyone has any questions for me afterwards. My work number, which is not a cell phone, so don't text it, and my email address.
You can take a screenshot if you want to know. I had a question on the mitigation projects. Is something like the dredging to keep the wetlands open in Huntington Beach, is that a potential for getting funding from these mitigation projects?
Likely no, because the habitats that are impacted do not involve coastal wetlands. All the freeways have specific types of impacts, and that's not one of them.
So yours only, you only deal with freeways, like say like how they're opening up where the naval base is, they're making a new entrance into the weapons station, like just
the new on and off ramps. Is that what you're talking about?
No, I'm just saying you don't get involved with mitigating that project or anything. It has to be a road.
No. So entrances were included, but they had to be on that list of A through N for this mitigation program to apply. So I'm not entirely familiar with the ones over by the weapons station. I'd have to look that up and would be happy to if that's helpful.
Melanie, I think that Nancy is referring to the channel inlet from for naval vessels from the ocean to the naval station rather than roadways.
Oh, okay, then yes, that is completely outside the scope of this program.
I guess I just didn't, I didn't get introduced to it in a way that I understood that it just roads.
Things that you drive on.
Thank you.
Melanie,
Yes.
Vic here, the map itself is both beautiful and loaded with detailed information. How can people get copies of it?
So I have it posted on the FHBP website under the resources section. There's a page specifically dedicated to the map, and we have both a low resolution and a high resolution version that are basically set to 3 feet by 3 feet. So don't expect to be able to print it on your 8.5 by 11 printer and have it look decent, because we're talking about a pretty large county and a lot of different property details.
Oh.
But it is available for download, and you can always zoom in and zoom out on a particular geography if you don't want to print it.
Well, I'm certainly not capable of doing this kind of thing, but would a sophisticated computer user be able to shrink the scale of the document so that it could be printed 8.5 by 11?
You could absolutely print it to 8.5 by 11, but the level of detail and the resolution goes down because all that information is getting crammed into a significantly smaller space.
Gotcha. Okay.
Well, that's very interesting. Thank you very much, Melanie.
You're welcome. So I'll stop sharing my screen in case anyone else needs to do something.
Oh, thank you, Melanie. That was really cool to hear, just to see like the kind of the political and human side, because that's what
Mhm.
Amigos started as, is people advocating for our natural spaces. So thank you very much for sharing that. That's awesome.
Yeah, you're welcome.
I was just wondering, do you have resources where like groups like ours could continue to get involved with the green vision, or just wondering if you guys have like opportunities for Amigos?
So we, in terms of, I'll break resources into a couple definitions. If you're looking to get informed about something, all those reports and fact sheets and maps are posted on our website, so you can read up on those specifically. We also have park scores and walk scores, so you know how your particular geography ranks in terms of, does it have enough park space, does it not? Is it close to the 10 community amenities that it should be, or does that need to be improved? In terms of kind of volunteering or getting involved, you can certainly sign up for our email list, which is available to subscribe to on our website. We just had a tree preservation policy that came before the Board of Supervisors. We've spent 5 years on it. I don't know if any of you know our Vice President, Gloria Sefton. She lives out in Tribuco. And then Mike Wellborn, who's our board president, just worked tirelessly on this tree policy. We're the only county in Southern California that doesn't have a policy that protects native trees. And the CEO voted, or not, didn't vote, he removed it from the list of consideration for Tuesday's meeting, and 5 years of work went out the door in an hour. It was just super disgusting. But there are moments like that when a policy is being considered where we're soliciting from our membership, supporters, and donors to get involved by sending a letter to a supervisor or to a city. Or we also do a lot of regional policy work with the Southern California Association of Governments. Amigos has been great signing on to those regional policies as well. So we're working on a green print that covers 6 counties. I'm already teeing up kind of what I'm anticipating to request for funding next year in terms of projects, one of which I'm thinking, although, you know, A, we don't have the money, and B, it's not necessarily a fundable idea, but to basically document, if you're a developer and you need to mitigate a certain type of habitat, and we've identified where those habitats are listed, how do you know who's working in the area that you can then go to and say, hey, Amigos, I'm looking for salt marsh habitat or coastal dunes or, you know, pickleweed, whatever, and they know who the resources are on the ground. So I'm hoping to come up with a database, or at least a layer for the Green Vision map that covers the entire 6-county area, which is Ventura, Los Angeles, Orange, San Bernardino, Riverside, and Imperial. It excludes San Diego, but that's fine. They have their own planning organization, and see where our geographies and our territories and our interests overlap. So that's another way to get involved. And we also have opportunities for folks to testify. What I've found in my tenure in this position is that the best way to testify is when you're organized, and I'll say that this applies to development projects as well. You are organized to the T. You've got everyone in a lineup so that the presentations make sense. You're under the time when you practice, and nobody is covering the same topic. And so I tend to write all the speeches because I know things so well, forwards and backwards and inside and out. And also, if you write the policy for somebody, it's so much easier to get it adopted than it is to go to the table and say, I want this, but I have nothing to show you that supports that effort. And that was actually a really strong lesson I learned. For those of you who know Carolyn Cavechi, who used to be the mayor for the city of Orange, she ran the Orange County Council of Governments as its chair at one point, and we were trying to get something in a document related to the environment based on our success with Measure M. And she sat on the OCTA board, so I thought, this is perfect, she's gonna know me. And she shredded the person in front of me. You want all this stuff and you came to me empty-handed, you know, what do you have to say for yourself? And I thought, oh man. So I get up there to testify and I said, this is what we want. We're working on a draft and we'll have a map to you as well by the end of tomorrow. So I anticipated what she was going to say to me and avoided getting reamed publicly. And that ended up leading to our success of having the first environmental or natural lands related policy in a document called a Sustainable Communities Strategy. That then led to the success, which again, Amigos was involved in those 3 coalitions at the Southern California Association of Governments. So there's all sorts of opportunities to get involved, but we don't have like boots on the ground restoration work. We're very policy based, which is not sexy or necessarily fun, but we seem to be effective at it, so we stick to our skills.
No less important. That's awesome.
Yeah.
Thank you, Melanie. Awesome. Thank you. Did anyone else have any further questions?
I'll put one more question to Melanie that she might not want to address. The Orange County Board of Supervisors District 2 representative is Michelle Steele here in this coastal area that includes Bolsa Chica. Would you comment on that one supervisor's support for your efforts and the environment in general?
So my experience with Supervisor Steele is pretty limited to the Orange County Transportation Authority. I will say that typically she's been supportive of the environmental mitigation program, but outside of that, I don't interact with her a whole lot. And as far as I can tell, based on the comments I've heard, she typically does not support conservation efforts. She would rather see houses on particular sites. And, you know, a consistent struggle, I would say, not just at the decision-making level, but just kind of property rights level, is that there are a lot of folks that advocate for property rights. You know, hey, this, you know, landowners should be able to put their 50 houses on this property if that's what they want to do. But if that same landowner chooses to sell their land for conservation, then no, they can't do that. That's a terrible idea. And it's like, wait a minute, if they have the right to build 50 houses, then they should have the right to sell the land for conservation. Your argument doesn't get to go only in one direction. It goes in both directions. So I think that probably applies to most of the supervisors, that they support property rights if it's for housing.
Bob and Nancy, that question was for you guys.
Alrighty, any further questions? 3, 2, oh, go ahead.
I got it.
Probably the answer you did not want, but
I thought it was pretty clear.
yeah.
All right.
Diplomatic too, I hope.
I knew you'd have to be,
Mm-hmm.
but that's why you've been tremendously successful over the years in doing so many things on our behalf. And you mentioned me as one of the senior folks here, and you're absolutely right. But I've watched over the years you do remarkable work on behalf of Orange County, and I want to express my tremendous gratitude to you.
Oh, thanks.